Hi guys, and welcome back to the podcast between myself and Jack. So this is the second edition. In the first edition, we talked a lot about some basic concepts with regard to training, and now today, what we're going to discuss is a bit around nutrition. And before we even get to that, we'll just have a bit of an update. So there's probably been a few bits going on in both of our lives between myself and Jack. Not necessarily between us, but we've got good bit of stuff going on within our lives. Personally, we ended the last podcast kind of bigging up AKA a lot, and now I'm an external PT from the gym, which I'm obviously proud to announce to be, in some way affiliated with a gym like that. It's brilliant. And Jack, we started the podcast talking about the fact that you were getting into prep, and now you're in prep. So do you wanna chat about that for a minute? How that's been going?
Yeah, so when we did the first podcast, I think I was 2 or 3 weeks, or I think it was like a month out from starting prep, and now I'm 4 weeks into prep, and pretty much a full month now, just over a month. Going well. It's nice not to have to stuff my face with food. So right now it's still kind of in the honeymoon phase of prep where everything's pretty easy, everything's nice, bit of hunger here and there. Down just over 4 kilos. And yeah, we're 14 weeks out from the first show. Everything's moving as planned. Still have a lot of room to work with in terms of variables. But the physique anyway is taking a step in the right direction. Definitely looks a lot better than when it was coming up in the previous improvement phase. So kind of the same body weight now. I'm just over 101 kilos. So looking back at what 101 kilos looked like on the way up into the improvement phase is looking a lot better. So that's a good positive, where kind of scale weight is the same, but body composition has improved. So everything's looking very positive, and it's only the beginning. It's going to get a lot more difficult here on out. So I welcome that. I'm looking forward to it. And that's pretty much the update as of current.
All good. Have you got a ballpark figure as to what you're getting down to, or?
The last time I kind of was shooting distance away from competing was 2021. Kind of COVID messed that up. So I got down to, I want to say, like 89, 90 kilos, and I was about 7 weeks out, give or take. I would have definitely been down to sub 85. I think this time around I will be somewhere in the 87, if I want to kind of give it a ballpark. 87, 88, pretty much like just under 20 kilos of scale weight if I had to make a guess. But hard to tell. I'll know when obviously closer to the time, but that's what it's looking like right now.
All good. I'm excited to see it unfold. Obviously, a big element of that is going to be your nutrition, and which is what we're going to be discussing today. So I think one thing that we're going to have to kind of refer back to quite regularly is who we are speaking to, because there's going to be considerations for you that wouldn't be particularly relevant to maybe a client that you're maybe starting working with, tomorrow morning or something like that. So there is always going to be that, and as good as possible, I think that where possible, we'll try to refer back to that point of who we're speaking to all the time. And so when we look at nutrition, it's actually such a minefield in and of itself. There's so many ways that we can go with this.
I want to preface before we start as well to the people listening, we might get very sidetracked and talk absolute shite. So just to bear that in mind, we're going to try and stay to the plan, but pretty much 80% of this is going to be winged. And we're going to try and just keep to the format, just as a preface to that.
We had a chat yesterday in the gym about what we were going to talk about here, and we said we'd keep it quick, and I think I was about 15 minutes between lateral raise sets. Anyways. So when we look at, nutrition, the three areas that we generally tend to be looking to improve is going to be our health, maybe performance and body composition. An important point is that an increase in the rate of one of these may doesn't necessarily lead to improvements in the other, as you were pushing to maybe the heaviest that you've been, that probably wasn't the most beneficial thing from a health perspective. Maybe from a performance perspective, things were going pretty good, up until a point maybe. And on the other end, as you get down to the lower end, I know you're someone who'll be keeping on top of things as good as possible. But of course, there's probably a middle ground there where health is actually going to be at its best. That's just, I guess, another consideration that we always have to have. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to all three areas, you'll see one area pretty much has to suffer in the others to improve, to a certain degree. Like you mentioned, towards the tail end of my improvement phase, I was sitting around 105.5 kilos consistently for a good month and a half. That was kind of where I kind of leveled off, and carrying around that weight at 5'9" is a lot of weight to hold, and at that point you'll have a detriment to health, especially when it comes to like cardiovascular health, specifically trying to carry around that weight, being kind of out of breath a lot, but pushing the boundaries when it comes to that improvement phase is kind of a necessary evil in order to make progressions. Just like you could say on the opposite end of that spectrum, when it comes to competition prep and getting that lean, it's a necessary evil to get that lean, and there's consequences to that. So one thing will suffer, and maybe the other two things will improve exponentially.
Absolutely, man. Um, One of the things I like to bring back to my clients is that from a nutritional perspective, we can make this really quite easy. Nutrition doesn't have to be hard from a theoretical perspective to get great results. We know that it's a lot more complicated. Like the actual processes themselves can be quite complicated, but like generally, in order to get good results for the client, we can keep it relatively simple, and we don't need to make it very very difficult. But whilst it might be simple, often what we'll find is that in practice it's not really that simple. It's not as easy as maybe it looks on a given day, and one of the reasons for this is maybe not putting the time in place before we even consider any of the theoretical considerations, and putting some practical things in place in order to make diet or nutrition like a sustainable practice for the individual. And the reason why most diets will fail is because they're just not particularly sustainable. So before we even get to the theory, I think it's important that we discuss some practical considerations. Or, when we look at something like someone who would have impacted my understanding of nutrition quite a bit is Eric Helms and his pyramid or hierarchy of nutrition. And he has his hierarchy with regard to the stuff that we'll obviously discuss later, but there's things around that which are super important as well, being adherence. Have you got anything to say, maybe with regard to, before you even start talking about the actual nutrition plan itself for the client, what sort of things are you trying to put in place there?
Definitely, yeah. I think what definitely gets overlooked a lot when it comes to this, and you could say this about training as well, is the theoretical kind of informs the practical, and the practical might not always look like the theoretical. Um, that theoretical is there to be used as obviously guidelines and a direction which you can move, and based on the individual in front of you, that might not always be the exact kind of thing to the book or to the word that is going to be theoretical. So just to bear that in mind when we are looking at um, scientific research or guidelines or things of that nature, that they are there to be used as that compass or map to point us in the right direction, and then we might have to slightly tweak things based off of that. Before we actually look into the diet in itself, obviously seeing where that individual is in the current moment in time, what is their previous history when it comes to nutrition, is a simple, basic kind of question that you can ask anyone, to see where they're currently at. If they've managed their nutrition in the past, have they worked with a coach, what's their relationship with food like? Do is there any issues with like eating disorders, etc.? Is there like just a simple like questionnaire filling out what are kind of the issues when it comes to nutrition right now, and where are they at from kind of like a knowledge standpoint. I think just having a really good basic understanding of the knowledge of nutrition as like anyone as a clientele, not even a coach, can help kind of inform your rationale to go about your day and to make decisions on your nutrition. So I think that's a few things to consider. I don't want to kind of ramble on too much about that, but understanding where the individual is at, where their current knowledge is there any potential issues or red flags when it comes to nutrition? Like I mentioned, like any disordered eating, is there any like poor relationship with food, any issues with like body dysmorphia or any issues with body image, like any red flags that would kind of, before you even put a diet in place or start to program, these are the areas that in which you should focus on. And there's some characteristics that I'd like to maybe run into maybe in the next kind of section in terms of what needs to be addressed and what needs to be agreed upon before starting this process. So when you do kind of like start that process, you need to go into it very open-minded and not have any kind of previous kind of ideas or things that you have learned going into that. If you're working with someone or if it hasn't worked in the past, you have to see it from a different lens or a different perspective. And there's, I don't know, should I go into the different characteristics, different things?
I'd love to hear about it. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
So when people kind of go about this process, I think there isn't a conversation about you have to have some sort of restraint, some sort of thing that you have to restrain from. And that isn't kind of talked about enough. When you go through this process, I feel a lot of time on social media, people say, oh, you can eat all the foods you enjoy and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, no, you can't. Maybe, but like, what is this thing that you're wanting to eat? What is the frequency and the dose that you're looking to eat it at? Like, it's all well and good saying, oh, you can lose weight and eat the food you still enjoy. It might make things 10 times harder, and you might not be getting a nutritionally fulfilling diet, and it just makes things a whole lot harder, and it gives people a little bit of false hope that there isn't some sort of restraint involved when it comes to this process. So I think that's the
Yeah,
first thing that you kind of have to consider when it comes to going about that process.
yeah, and you know what, if I can just add to that, when it comes to restraint, there, I think because we've seen like the emergence of flexible dieting, if it fits your macros, it's kind of painting this picture that you can eat whatever foods you want and reach your end goal, and that can be brought way too far to the point where people are now looking at restraint as like, oh my god, you don't need to do that at all. You don't need to show restraint whatsoever. And there's a massive difference between rigidity and restraint. So with rigidity, you feel like you have to eat this exact food at this exact time, or else you can't, lose the body weight that you're looking to have. And there's loads of research on rigidity, which does show that being too rigid is not going to be a good thing. There's actually a study on bread where the same groups of individuals were giving the same dieting protocols. The only difference being one group was told that they couldn't have bread. And just that kind of rigid factor led to that group losing less body weight and being less successful in the diet and gaining more body weight back over time. And the difference, it's just a small difference between, restraint and rigidity. And restraint, everyone, you need to show restraint to do anything well really in life, but specific to nutrition, restraint even comes to when you're in a massing phase. You know how much calories you have, so you're restrained to that general range of calories. Um, Bodybuilders can be somewhat different when it comes to rigidity, I believe, so that because they're already so motivated by that outcome, having a more rigid approach is going to be fine for them for
Mhm.
general lifestyle clients. The difference between restraint and rigidity is something that I really drive home.
Yeah, and I think that gets a bit. There's a lot of negative. There's a lot of negative conversations when it comes to that. Like that can be unhealthy, or like that can be very negative when it comes to that. Like if you're able to control your nutrition, if you're able to restrain kind of the food you're putting in your mouth, that is a privilege, not a problem. Like there's much like other things to really stress about and care about than controlling the food that's put in your mouth, because there's people in situations that can't do that and they don't have the privilege to do it. So I don't understand why you have to have this kind of negative conversation about it. Like you're restricting your food. What's the big deal? Like you have the privilege to do that, and I think that it shouldn't. Yeah, I don't want to just keep rambling on there, but that's what I mean. Like having restraint and being able to control your nutrition is a privilege, not a problem.
Yeah,
Um, However, again, preface this: if there is an issue with disordered eating, if there is something that is uncontrollable, then that is something that is unhealthy and that needs to be addressed. Okay, so if you are doing it out of your own control and it is um, your own doing of this, then that's perfectly fine. I don't see the issue with that. It only becomes an issue when it's uncontrollable or you're acting in a way where it is unhealthy for you, and you're putting yourself in a position where you're in an unhealthy manner. That can be anything related to body composition, disease, whatever. So that's another thing. Second thing is when people go about this process, characteristic is kind of being your own coach a little bit and not like, and what I mean by that is you have to kind of have some sort of self monitoring. Like you have to be able to manage your day to day. You need to have something to reference to make sure that you are moving in the right direction. And that can be as simple as just obviously tracking your food. It can be as simple as tracking your scale weight, taking progress pictures. If you don't have a coach to tell you to do that, then I think you need to be able to have this own kind of self monitoring, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah.
I struggle myself. That's the main reason why I have a coach in the first place as well. Like it's not to tell me to be how much calories to eat or what reps to do in a gym or movements to do. It's to have that person to overview everything
Hmm.
and keep me on track with that goal. I think you have to be pretty well advanced, very well advanced or very well in tune with yourself and objective to every very objective to be able to do it yourself, especially as you get leaner now. When you get leaner,
Hmm.
your
Yeah.
objective. You
Yeah. You kind of, yeah, I don't even know how to describe that. Um, Yeah, I don't know. That's just again, it's a normal thing. Like it's a
Yeah,
normal thing to wake up one day goes and you go like, I feel small, or the next day you like, I feel big. Like it's weird. It's just it happens. It's normal. You have good days, you have bad days. I think that's just a normal part of the process, and having that outsider, that outside view, looking at you as an individual, and being detached from how you're feeling is very important, to kind of keep you on a straight and narrow and not kind of put you in a position where you're not going in the right direction because you've somehow conjured up this reason as to why maybe you should just slash your calories or just
have a
bump your
refeed.
food up or do whatever. Yeah, refeed. Yeah, cheat meal, cheat day,
Yeah.
whole lot. You kind of mentioned this previously as well in terms of like another good characteristic is to have the ability to focus on a long term goal, or having a long term goal, or having that why in terms of what you're doing, why you're doing it. Could be many reasons. Obviously, my reason is I'm stepping on stage half naked tanned to get judged. Some other reason could be you want to get in shape for a holiday, you want to look after your health a bit better. There could be many reasons, but that why has to be the reason or the driving force to act the way you're going to act. You have to have something there to push you forward. When especially when you have days where you do not feel like doing anything whatsoever.
Yeah.
Um, so having a structured plan, being able to focus long term on a goal, having a goal in general, short and long term, I think is another important characteristic in order to make this successful and sustainable long term.
Yeah, man, I found that so powerful. That anchor point, that thing that you're, doing, whatever you're doing, the steps on a daily basis. That I think my steps were up to 17,000, 18,000 in my photo shoot prep a day. Like, I didn't want to do more than the 8 to 10,000 that I would naturally do in a day, and even they became hard at that point.
Mm,
But having that photo shoot at the end, where I was like, "Well, look, I've got a date locked in 5 6 weeks time here. If I'm not right, like it's gonna show on that day if I don't do the things now." And it made it so easy, like to the point where that question that I just mentioned there, it wasn't a question anymore. And if I compare that to some other diets that I've had where I've just been dieting, it's been very different. And it doesn't have to be a photo shoot. It doesn't have to be you getting ready for a show. It can literally be for the improvement of one's health. But if that why is strong enough and you put some sort of a timeline in place, it's just so powerful. It's the one thing that I really always try to drive with a client from the very get go is why on earth are we doing this?
mm,
What does it mean to you on the rainy days where you got to get them steps in, or you got to go to the gym and you'd rather stay in bed? What on earth is it actually meaning to you right now?
mm. Yeah, definitely. And I think a final thing to kind of round this thing up as well is kind of your environment or like your social support. So the people you're around, I think, is again another characteristic that will hugely affect the how successful you are and the sustainability long term on what you're trying to do with your nutrition or your training, body composition goals. Um, it makes things a whole lot easier when you are surrounded by people who are like minded and are kind of trying to do the same thing. Maybe not to the same degree, but are focusing on being better and improving their overall health, their body composition, their performance. So I think that's another thing to consider.
I think that one is very important, man. You might necessarily, I think, you know, from what I know of you, you have an environment where a lot of people around you are quite like minded. I can't say the same myself, but I think, and a lot of people might, relate to that too. And I know I've had clients in the past where maybe they've lost, maybe not lost friendships, but they've had disagreements with friends. I know of clients who have been told, say, you've changed and stuff like that because of the way they're now acting, and they're not going out on the beer every weekend because they've got
Mm-hmm.
actual goals. Um, these things are all, they can properly impact an individual. And I've had people like, questioning, am I doing the right thing here? And specifically to the client who said, my friends are saying I'm changed. And I was like, yeah, well, maybe you have changed, but like, is that a bad thing? Compare what you were doing back then toward the things that you're doing right now. And which one of them versions are you happy,
Yeah.
and then I was like, oh shit, I actually have changed, and it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
But particularly with kind of family and the people that you're going to see on a daily basis,
Yeah.
if they're not as much in line with what you are doing, I think it's so important to have a conversation with them and explain why you're doing it, especially when you get to maybe what you're doing right now, Jack. And if your family wasn't really as understanding of, not your family, but our family wasn't as understanding of everything that's going on, um, and how you're potentially going to feel as you get into the later stages of that dieting phase, and um, just making them aware of that and why you're doing it. And maybe they'll help you out, maybe they won't, they don't have to, because at the end of the day it's not their choice to do these things. But definitely, I think it's really important if you are looking, whether you've got the support of the people around you, that you have that chat, explain to them why maybe you're not going to be having the Chinese on a Saturday night that you usually have had, and things like that. I think it's very important.
But just to let people know that are in that situation, because I was in that situation when I did my first competition in 2019. Like, I didn't really have a lot of people, like, didn't actually have any close friends that understood what I was doing, or why I was doing it, because they never experienced it before. Um, yeah, so like even at that time, like family as well, they understand it a bit more now because they kind of, as time went on, they've understood it. But yeah, they won't really understand. Even if you have that conversation with them, they still won't understand. Like, have the conversation, communicate why you're doing, what it is for, the whole lot, explain everything, but be ready and just expect for them still not to understand. And for what you just said to them, it might just completely go out the window and they will still ask the same question. So that's not a bad thing because they just are not aware of what's going on. You understand because you're in it. They don't understand whatsoever because they've never experienced it before. So for anyone who is experiencing that, have the conversation, but still be ready to experience the same questions, the same kind of um, issues that arise, like when you kind of cook mince at 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the evening for the next day, your ma's wondering why the fuck you're doing it. That might happen. So, like, it's normal. Try and associate with people who maybe understand that because that can help. Try and reach out to people that you see online or who are in your gym. Like, obviously, don't completely disassociate from the friends you've had or your family members. Don't do that, but do try and associate with some people who do understand, who have experienced it before, are going through the same things because that will help along the way. You'll feel that you aren't too left out or lonely or experiencing kind of them feelings which might potentially prevent you from getting to where you want to be because that is something you want to do. So I think that's probably the last characteristic I would like to talk on with regards to that.
Yeah, yeah, and I won't. I could go on all day on that, but I'm for the sake of the
Yeah,
podcast and
no,
the.
that's a big one. Yeah.
I think, yeah, I agree with everything you say there. Um, so moving swiftly toward the theory side of things, is that where you happy? You want to add anything else?
Coming from there, then it's kind of moving into, right, well, what approach, what method, um, what way in which you're going to manage things moving forward with regards to your nutrition before you kind of get into the meat and potatoes. Excuse the pun. But like, what are you going to do to create that adherence? What are you going to do to um, structurally kind of put everything in place? Like, what are you going to do from a managing perspective? The approach you're going to take, whether it's flexible dieting, whether it's meal plan, whether it's time restricted eating, whether it's these different things, these different methods we can use to incorporate into someone's nutrition.
Yeah, and I think you used a word there that I think we can kind of use to kind of start this conversation, and it's just structure. And structure comes down to, it's going to be a very individual consideration, and it's going to be based on one's lifestyle and then their preferences as well. For me, structure is at the heart of everything that can be good about your nutrition if you set the structure up appropriately. It's also one of the areas that can be massive downfalls of a lot of individuals who fail within the dieting phase itself, or just make it super hard for themselves. So for me, when I'm looking at structure, it's one of the first things that I will discuss with a client. One of the first things being, what on earth does your day look like? And where is your nutrition right now? So we'll get an idea of what they've been doing. I'll have a basic understanding of where we're looking to go with their nutrition from, the perspective of, right, someone around there, of that gender, around that size, with that much muscle mass, we'll start this individual off here, and we all obviously have to know that it's going to be a guesstimate with regard to calories and macros if they don't have any previous experience there that they can kind of relate to you. But getting an understanding of their lifestyle, and then showing them how they can put this all into practice and hit what we're looking to do is generally the way that I try to go here. You know, with structure, it can act as a guide to help that individual to see how to hit their numbers, how to spread the stuff out that I'm looking to achieve across a day. And of course, it can just help remove decision making fatigue, which is probably a bigger thing in a dieting phase, but it's a thing that's always going to be there.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, simply like kind of when can you eat during the day? Like what is your current preferences when it comes to food? Do you have any intolerances? Do you have any foods you really dislike? Trying to use that to fit it into your structure. That's going to help obviously create adherence and sustainability with their nutrition. So I'm assuming that's kind of what you meant in terms of tying that in.
Yeah, I sometimes jump the gun and just know that I'm talking to myself.
Yeah, yeah.
I was saying all of them things, but I wasn't saying them with regard to like literally, you cannot give the same person a meal plan that you've just given someone because they don't run on the exact same schedule. So if you're telling someone to eat at 8 a.m., 11 a.m., 2 a.m., basically the times that you maybe eat in school or something like that, school is probably the best time that you can ever get on top of your nutrition because you've got
Yeah.
these exact windows to eat
Yeah.
at. But you know, if an individual is working night shifts versus another individual, I'm not. You can't tell someone to eat at these times.
Mm-hmm.
They're in work. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
not actually possible. And then you've got the preference side of things, which obviously comes into play there too. I spent so much time on this initially, man. Like for the first, I'm not sure how you do it, but with me, there might be an initial familiarization phase where I'm just literally getting this data from the individual. I've basically given them calories and macros, but I'm finding out how they're actually setting that up. So I might initially put them in the deep end to see how they get on and teach them from there. That's kind of my preference way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I'll give them some considerations based on what they've provided me with regard to their structure, but I like to throw people in the deep end to a degree and just see where they are, rather than me telling them stuff that maybe they already know as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would do something similar depending on the information that I get back from the person. Like if they've tracked their nutrition in the past, if they understand what calories, like the simple understanding of like calories, macronutrients, etc. I probably will go with that approach. If it's someone who's brand new, hasn't done that whatsoever, within kind of that questionnaire, um, gathering that information, I will just get like a very comprehensive list of what do you like, what do you dislike, what are the foods you eat kind of often, what foods are, um, what foods do you eat a lot, like what are the foods that I can't remember how I phrase it, but like what foods do you like that are like I can't remember how I phrased it, like highly palatable foods, like foods that are very energy dense, like what's your favorite takeaway, what your favorite like sweets, that kind of stuff. Like I go into detail in terms of what do they like and what do they consume often, and then from there I will either create a meal plan for that individual, see how they get on. We might change the method down the line, but give them the meal plan, go through that kind of coaching process in terms of, right, this is how we're going to structure your day. This is why we've structured your day the way it is. Giving them some information on obviously what calories are, what protein is, carbohydrates, fat, what is their role, and then they might be able to shift over to more of a tracking approach. And I might make sure that they incorporate a list of foods, list of high protein foods, high carbohydrate foods, high fat foods primarily. They can try and stay within the food types. And then I might say, right, out of these kind of food types, I want 80% of your day to look like this. And then you can incorporate some of these other things depending on what their budget is when it comes to nutrition. That is kind of one example that we can go down. but yeah, similar approach, depending on the person. Um, yeah, does that pretty much
Yeah,
cover what I kind of forgot
I
what the whole convert like what the question was with regards to that.
was simply looking at kind of structure and how we were initially, setting up some sort of
All right, yeah,
structure for it. And of course, yeah, like so, if someone literally couldn't tell you well, maybe not the definition, but what sources of food you can get protein from, or stuff like that. Of course, I'm not just going to say, well, hit 170 grams of protein today, and they're
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah,
hit 1 gram. uh,
yeah,
yeah, it's all about matching, the client and their experience level and their goal to the setup that you're going to have in place, and obviously that's something that changes over time as their goal changes, but also as their experience level changes. And being dynamic with that starting point is important.
yeah.
Shall we go into talk about the kind of hierarchy which we discussed yesterday? Is now a good time to switch over toward that?
We mentioned that kind of adherence, your habits and behaviors being kind of the foundation, or kind of that overlooks the pyramid, and then kind of the starting thing in relation to how this will affect body composition, how this will affect um, how you look, and your body composition is going to be initially your overall caloric intake and kind of energy balance as a whole. So that is kind of the very first thing to look at, because that is the be all and end all. That is the thing that will hugely influence how you look and your body composition moving forward.
Yeah, and so if we think about this as a hierarchy, it's right at the bottom of that. I'll probably put up like a little image of what it would look like now on the screen just for everybody. But basically, energy balance or caloric balance, we're going to use them terms relatively interchangeably. They mean the same thing. Calories being a unit of energy. So with that, it's going to have the most profound impact upon your outcome. So if we're thinking about the pyramid or hierarchy, like a lot of the times individuals come in and the first question, Jack, I'm sure you know as well, is what supplement should I take? And you're like, just hold your horses. Let's ensure that we have our energy balance exactly where that needs to be. Let's ensure that before we even consider, the supplements that we might take, are you getting in enough protein? If you are, and you're like, you don't enjoy whey protein supplementation, you don't like it for whatever reason, you don't actually need to get that if you're already hitting your protein intake. But maybe if for me, I just enjoy whey protein. I like it. I know we're going to get to talk about protein down the line, but it's just the idea of you don't need to worry about supplementation if your energy balance isn't already in place. So just ensure that you know exactly what things are going to have the largest impact upon the outcomes. With regard to energy balance, it's going to determine whether we gain, lose, or maintain our body weight. Not over the course of a day, but over the course of a much longer period of time. So we'll have on one side of the energy balance equation energy in, which is going to be literally just food and drink. And on the other side of the equation, what we'll have is um, basal metabolic rate. We will have non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and then exercise thermogenesis. Non-exercise activity thermogenesis just being all of the movements that you do during a day above lying in a bed, essentially. So me fidgeting around here, that's actually going to have quite a big impact upon the energy expenditure during the day. The steps, which is what most people will use as somewhat of a surrogate measure for their total, need for the day. And then you've got your exercise activity thermogenesis, which I would just say is any movements that you do with the goal of adaptation or of winning competition. That's literally how I tend to look at that. And then you've got thermic effective feeding, which is essentially the energy used in the digestion and absorption of different foods. So they're going to be the four things which will impact energy out, and it's the balance between these things that will actually determine whether we gain or lose body weight. Have you anything to add to that?
No, well, not really. When it comes to that, the energy balance again. Also, when we talk about calories, we're talking about energy. So calories and energy will be used interchangeably. Um, because calories refer to the energy that can be extracted from food. So that is why we might use, like, we can use the word energy as calories or calories as energy, because calories isn't like an objective thing. Like, you can't, like, it's not like a molecule, it's not like a chemical. It's basically a way in which we can describe energy, or like heat. So this energy can be obviously used in the energy inside the equation and the energy outside the equation, and it's the kind of relationship between the energy in and the energy out that will hugely dictate how your body composition changes or how your scale weight changes on a day by day, week by week, month by month basis.
Yeah, 100%. Um, and whilst we discussed there, like the ideas around the energy outside of the equation, and there being what, four of them, they don't all carry, the same value. Basically, basic metabolic rate will have the largest impact. What is it, about 50 to 60% of your
Yeah.
total energy expenditure. Then you'll have meat probably having the second largest impact. Obviously, if you do loads of exercise, that can possibly drive that up. If you're doing something like an ultra marathon or something like that, um, which we aren't going to be doing anytime soon, I don't think. Um, then you'll have meat, which will account for whatever, sorry, no, exercise activity thermogenesis, which will account for generally, usually a smaller percentage, and thermic effective feeding will have the lowest impact there. With the different macronutrients that you're having a different like level or percentage of the amount of energy that you're taking in being burnt off yet again. Protein has the highest thermic effective feeding, but that is often kind of misrepresented. So what thermic effective feeding might account for 5 to 10% of your total daily energy expenditure, and 30% of your proteins. The protein that you take in might be used within that, but that's 30% of 5 to 10%. You know what I mean? So I think I've seen posts recently where it's like, have a much higher protein diet because the thermic effect of feeding, and it's like, yeah, but that accounts for such a small percentage of energy out, and who the
Mm-hmm.
hell wants to eat protein today?
Yeah,
But yeah,
fiber as well is quite high.
fibers, yeah.
Fiber would be a close second to that as well. Protein and fiber, again, like you said, very insignificant when it comes to the energy out. Obviously, the biggest two variables are going to be your physical activity and your NEAT. They're going to be the two things that are going to change, or that can be adjusted a lot, out of the two, or sorry, out of the four, them two.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So we can get caught up in all of them things, but it's like, what can we directly impact here? So
Mm-hmm.
when we're looking to make manipulations to our body comp and to body weight, if that was a desired outcome, you can impact the calories that you're taking in. So you can impact basically that entire side of the equation there. So you can have more or less of calories. On the other side, with regard to basal metabolic rate, in the short term, you can't really impact that. You
Mm-hmm.
can in the long term, probably, as you build more muscle mass and stuff like that. But in
And
the
just to, sorry, give a little bit of context of what BMR is, for people who don't understand that. So basal metabolic rate, or maybe sometimes referred to resting metabolic rate, is essentially the energy required to kind of keep you alive, essentially, to kind of keep everything functioning, from a kind of your organs, your brain, everything that isn't involving movement. So you kind of like lying down, not doing anything whatsoever, awake, but just not doing anything, not speaking, not doing anything at all. So basal metabolic rate is the energy required to essentially just keep you alive. Like an example would be like a coma, for example. Um, just to clarify that, probably some people don't know what the fuck BMR is. So just to give that bit of a clarification.
Yeah, 100%. So then we're not really impacted that. Maybe in the long term you might be able to. I don't know like how much by, but let's say in the short term when we're looking to make this change to our body composition right now, that's not one that we can really manipulate. Then we've got thermic effective feeding. As I said, it's such a small thing that I'm like, I don't think about it. It's not something that ever comes into my kind of coaching processes. So we're left with exercise activity thermogenesis and non-exercise activity thermogenesis as being the real drivers that we have in order to make that change. So for NEAT, it's generally steps. I'm not sure where you put cardio. I just throw it into exercise, but I think you can throw it into whichever one you want. I'm putting in exercise for this, but
Yeah, neat would be all unconscious movement. It's something
yeah,
that is involved that you don't think about. And if you try and think about it, then it's not neat because you're thinking about it, which can sound quite confusing, but your body essentially is very, very smart in terms of how it will adapt to either an energy deficit or an energy surplus. When you experience or you are in an energy deficit, your body will adapt to that situation where if it notices or um, experiences a loss in energy availability, you will see an adaptation where you won't move as much unconsciously. To keep things very simple, for example, if we look at the very kind of extreme side of things, if you see anyone very, very close to like stage in competition, they look like they are a zombie. They try and not move at all. They blink slower, they talk slower, they just their body movement is a lot slower. So that's the extreme side of things. That's your body's way of conserving energy. So everything that you do that's unconscious, that is neat, and everything that you do that is conscious or formal or scheduled, that is physical activity.
yeah. So we can impact our exercise activity thermogenesis. Now, I cardio is the one that from a body composition considerations that we're really driving there. So we're not really going to be driving our resistance training with the idea of making manipulations to increase the size of a calorie deficit, for example. Like that's
Yeah.
not a consideration. Resistance training is there from solely a muscle, well, generally from solely a muscle building perspective or muscle retention perspective. And then you've got the cardio, which will probably get titrated up over time on a needs must basis. And yeah, so we can impact NEAT by steps, by driving steps up, and we can impact our exercise activity from a cardiovascular perspective, mostly when we're looking to drive adaptation there. So it's calories in, NEAT, and exercise activity thermogenesis. Yeah. Now
Yeah,
over time, sorry, can I? Yeah, over
yeah, go.
time. Say this to add to
Sorry.
this. Have you got something to add to
No, I was
this?
literally going to say they're going to be the three biggest levers or levers when it comes to obviously
Yeah,
adjusting body composition.
yeah, of course. And over time, what was maybe a 500 calorie on average deficit for you will change, and one of them being the reasons that Jack mentioned. If you're not controlling for NEAT in somewhat of a controlled manner, your NEAT will drop off. Even if you're staying on top of steps, obviously that's one that we can help keep it as regulated as possible.
Hmm.
But still, how much of this I'm doing now, you'd know that I'm maybe not in a dieting phase. uh,
I'm
yeah,
still not there yet. Once we get on
okay,
this podcast, I'll literally be sitting here like
I'll take
not
over
moving
this one.
whatsoever.
Even from so basically everything on the energy out will go down a bit. BMR will go down. I think it goes down like maybe 15%, 30%, 30% in some cases. You will have, even exercise wise, your output just won't be as great. And obviously there's a depletion aspect within that, but you're probably not going to burn as much calories from that side of things either. So again, just something to account for. Maybe not try and change, because as I said, training is there from a muscle building perspective, but it will probably pull down a little bit. Even thermic effective feeding, because you're taking in less food now, that's going to be lower too. So all of them things on that energy outside of the equation actually get reduced, and as a result, you're probably gonna, well, you can bump up your exercise from a cardio point of view to maybe hold that where it is, to keep the rate of change that you're maybe looking to have there, or from a calories in perspective, that's where you'll need to maybe make adjustments to them over time.
Yeah, definitely. So again, like I said, this is a way in which your body will try and combat this lack of energy availability, and obviously it kind of senses this deficit and the reduction of energy stores within the body. When we get a reduction in body fat, when we experience a lack of energy coming in, we will notice these um, metabolic adaptations is kind of like the buzzword to this. And metabolic adaptations just means exactly what you explained there. It's just the reduction of certain things on the energy outside of things, but also slightly the increase in a few other things. So when we experience this, one kind of increase will be to hunger hormones. So like the likes of ghrelin, that will increase as a way to which to kind of combat this, to try and get you to eat more because hunger levels increase. So there's certain ways your body will um, tell you or want you to eat more food, or restrict you from losing more body fat or more body mass. Um, that is essentially what metabolic adaptation is without making it too complicated.
And man, that is one of the reasons structure has to be in such a sound place, which we already discussed.
Yeah.
Because as these things happen and emotion starts to come into play, if you haven't got the structure as what you're eating when you're eating, and ghrelin picks up, that's just like, oh, I'm gonna eat now, I'm hungry now. Because there's a time to be in line with your, internal cues, and there's a time to maybe try and disregard them a little bit.
Hmm.
Because if you don't and you haven't got the structure in place, diets tend not to be as successful as others.
Yeah.
And have you got anything more on calories, or maybe how much of a deficit or surplus one might want to be in? Just something
Yeah,
that
that's
popped
a.
up.
I'd say a lot of people have questions about how much of a deficit or
Yeah.
like calculating calories, and I think that one gets a bit. It gets butchered a bit. In terms of finding your starting point when it comes to calories, this one can be very, very vague. There's different approaches and different methods we can use to kind of calculate where someone should start. Um, to be honest, the way in which I do it most of the time, like 9 times out of 10, is kind of seeing where they're at, like what they're currently eating, and see how their body weight responds, or gather some information on, right, what does your typical day look like. Now that can be a bit inaccurate because some people will leave out a lot of things.
Yeah.
I can understand why, but we can use different equations. There's so many different equations online which aren't that accurate, but the whole idea is to get you into a ballpark. Once you're in that ballpark figure, then it's about that self-monitoring that I talked about. Are we tracking our scale weight on a daily basis and taking averages? Are we looking at visuals in terms of progress pictures and adjust accordingly? Other different subjective markers like how you're performing in the gym, what your hunger levels like, etc., etc. But to find that starting point, I think, is just to track, give yourself a number, maybe go to an equation like a Harris Benedict equation, just to get a ballpark, see where you're at, and then adjust. Um, because like for me and you, it's quite easy. Like we can pretty much be pretty close to what someone should be eating because we've seen it so many times that when you see someone's progress pictures, you get some information back from them. You could be pretty accurate in terms of where they should fall, and then based on the information they give you over the next 2 weeks, you can just make adjustments and they're in the right direction.
Yeah, like honestly, I don't really use the equations as much as I used to, because I end up having to make this a similar adjustment all the time. So
Mhm.
more so now, if I've got a client coming to me with, with no previous history of, tracking, I generally have a number in my mind, and like, right, generally individuals who are in and around this body weight with at that kind of, with that body composition, this generally tends to be a good starting point for them, and I might go with that. Then we'll trial that out for, generally I like 2 weeks, but even within a week you're going to start to get a lot of information as you see the daily numbers. It's probably the only time that I look at daily numbers. After that, I'm averages all the time, just due to the changes that will occur across a week. Um, but yeah, so I literally will be looking at the percentage change that we're seeing per week within a deficit, and using that over time to kind of drive things rather than any sort of equations.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
well,
Very,
guys,
very much.
the average body weight per week is an extremely beneficial tool to use because you're going to have so much fluctuation with regard to your body weight on a daily basis. Um, it varies person to person. Like I have some clients who will literally jump 2 kilos a day and just have zigzags of that. Um, for whatever reasons themselves. Whereas other individuals will be really, really tightly controlled with regard to where their numbers fall on a daily basis.
Hmm.
So having that, that average and following the trend is
Hmm.
it's also powerful for the client because I know a lot of individuals initially don't like tracking, the number on a daily basis or how that can
Hmm.
feel. Whereas we're just taking this average, and it can be really powerful as a tool for building adherence in individuals who don't really enjoy doing it, and then obviously just not being so focused on that morning number that comes up on the scale.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Obviously, it's very easy when, like, because most clients that kind of come to me, and I'd say for you as well, don't have a lot of experience with managing their nutrition. Obviously, if someone comes to you and they actually are quite proficient at managing their nutrition, they've tracked their food, they're currently tracking their food, and they send you over, this is what they're tracking, that's going to be a lot more accurate, and you can kind of be very kind of to the point straight away, and you'll usually see that response in the direction you want.
Yeah,
Usually, when people come to me starting out for the first time, I will probably be a little bit more aggressive than I would if someone is a bit more intermediate and advanced in terms of how much of a perceived deficit I will create when it comes to nutrition,
yeah,
and then adjust accordingly, just so I can get that. I hopefully will get that initial drop in scale weight and see that continue moving down, and then maybe pull them back a little bit, just so
yeah.
they can have that initial reward to their
Momentum.
process. Yeah,
Yeah.
momentum. Yeah.
Once
So.
that at the start, it's brilliant. So once they see that deficit, the number dropping, if it's body weight loss or fat loss that we're looking to achieve, when that happens, it actually does help a lot from my experience getting that initial drop. So I agree. Yeah. So going a little bit aggressive initially is a good idea.
Yeah. So for anyone who isn't sure about where to start, one, just from an educational standpoint, like understanding what these things are and kind of what foods are higher in certain things, it would be hugely beneficial, even if you just tell yourself 2 weeks of tracking everything on MyFitnessPal or Chronometer, whatever nutrition app there is, just making sure that whatever you track into the app is accurate to what it is on the app, to what it is on the label. Just make sure that's correct. It can be a little bit time consuming, but it's worth it in the long term for your own benefit and for your own accuracy moving forward. So just managing it, tracking it, see where you land, and then also alongside that, you measure scale weight, take the averages of week 1 and week 2, see the direction in which you're moving, account for any issues in terms of, like, I don't know, like if sleep's been really, really poor, if you are doing night shifts, or if your meal timing's all over the place, then account for that. But you should be pretty sound when it comes to just tracking your food, see what you consume, manage your scale weight, see the direction in which you're moving, and then adjust accordingly. Um, I think that kind of leads on to, right, what makes up the calories in terms of macronutrients.